Welcome back, everybody, to another week at Beyond the Trailer Park. Looking a little lean this week. So last week, I, of course, was not on the show. I was off listening to our good friend Chris DiCarlo speak in Mississauga, and the ladies took over and had a good old time from what I hear. Well, this week it looks like we're kind of doing the opposite of that. Poor Miss Ashley is sitting in the dark in the middle of a thunderstorm with no electricity right now, and sadly no electricity means no Wi-Fi either. So she is stuck there, and assuming Beth is having internet issues as well. I've seen her I'm online light kind of come and go a couple of times, and she's not around, so I can only blame it on the bad Wi-Fi too. So that's okay. Here I am, and joining me this week, and actually not too far from me either, is my friend here, Doug Thomas, who runs the Secular Connection Secular group, among other things. He's a very busy fellow. So welcome, Doug.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Excellent. So not a whole lot to recap right now, though a couple of things I did want to mention. First of all, is people who know me know the whole thing in Bangladesh is something that really raises my hackles. And we've had a couple other attacks Saturday in Bangladesh, and the one gentleman was killed, unfortunately, who was the publisher of Avjit Roy's works. He was hacked to death in his office. And there was another attack on a couple of other writers, one of whom is actually married to a Canadian citizen. So that's especially important for Canada because that affects one of our own people. His name is Tariq Rahim, and he is, last I heard, he was still in critical condition, but he was still alive, and we're hoping for a quick and full recovery for him. And, you know, it just boggles my mind that shit like that can happen. I just, Doug, when we were at the non-conference, we had a young fellow from Bangladesh speak about that as well. And it's just amazing that that can happen in this day and age.
Well, yeah, they have some really extreme religious people there that are, and I gather that, and I was talking to a girl who came from Bangladesh yesterday, and she said they actually had a list of 94 people that they gave to the police and said, these are atheists, and if you don't get them, we will. And so that's the list they're working from. It's a vigilante group, and the police basically are dragging their heels as far as I can tell.
Well, they are. And one of the gentlemen that was killed this summer, named Niloy, I know he had actually gone to the police on more than one occasion and said, look, I know for a fact I'm being targeted. These people are trying to kill me. And the reaction the police gave was, well, I guess you shouldn't write that stuff then, should you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's their attitude, you know.
Yeah. And that poor man was hacked to death in his own home in his child's bedroom.
Yeah. I mean, they're terrorist killings. They want to induce fear and whatever. So they're doing it in the most nasty way they can imagine.
And the thing that gets me is they obviously don't understand that if you and your God is afraid of words, that makes you and him the big pussy here. You know, you're killing people over, and what kind of a wuss is your God that he has to have you do all his dirty work for him? That too.
Yeah. And our problem in Canada is we have this Office of Religious Freedom, and they have a thing they call the media room on their website. And they list all of the press releases that they've made. And most of them are about vandalism of Christian churches or whatever. You very rarely hear anything about this kind of thing, and we try to hold their feet to the fire, and they did write a letter in support of Raif Badawi at one point, but that's about all they've done. And again, it comes back to that we don't want to jeopardize relationships with Bangladesh, where we can get our cheap clothing made.
Hell. Well, Doug, before we get too deep into things, let's tell everybody a little bit about yourself. I know you're local to me here, and we've met and hung out a few times. But were you religious, and if so, what flavor? And how did you become to be a secular activist?
Oh, okay. That goes back a way. But I was raised in a United Church household. Fortunately for me, my parents were what I would call practicing Christians, and they were more concerned about the ethics than they were about the letter of the Bible or anything else. So it wasn't my bringing up in Christianity wasn't terribly strict, but I lived in this when I was developing and got old enough to think for myself at all. I was in this little village of 500 people where the churches could have shared eavesdrops. They were so close. 500 people, and I think 6 churches or something. Sorry?
What village was that?
This is a place called Merlin, and nobody's ever heard of it. It was southwest of Chatham. It was but at any rate, it's a nice little village, and people were very nice. But so as I began to realize that I started to question this stuff, the clergy there were nice guys, and they probably helped people through marriage and grieving and all that stuff very well, but they were not on the A team of theology. So when I started asking questions that were kind of theological in nature, they were lost and didn't know what to do with that question. And so at one point, I actually literally got patted on the head. And there. You don't question that. That's just something we just have to accept as true. The library in town consisted of a little room with 5 shelves of books, so there was no research material there. The high school I went to was even worse. So I didn't have any resources to get any information, and that kind of put things on hold.
And I'm going to say it was definitely pre-internet.
Oh, yes. Actually, BC, before computers.
Yes.
So I actually did belong to the church group, but the reason for that was that all the girls belonged to the church group, and the only way you could possibly get to know girls was to belong to these church youth groups, and it didn't make a lot of difference. They spent most of the evening washing their hair, as far as I could tell. But at any rate, so finally, as I went to university, at about that time, I was really ready to leave the church or whatever. So I went off to Western and found a library which had information and some atheists and so on, and gradually began to realize, okay, this is cool. I don't have to believe this stuff, and gradually moved away. But it was one of those sort of majority atheists who really wasn't involved with any other atheists in any formal way until really fairly recently, 2002. I finally decided I should get involved, and that's when I got tied up with Humanist Canada and SoFree, and Society of Ontario Freethinkers.
Yes.
And from there, got involved with, and now the person who was taking over that organization, when I joined it, there was consisted of about 10 or 15 people all over the age of 80 whose generation as atheists was keep your head below the parapet and just meet in somebody's living room. And the other person who joined a bit before me and who was kind of taking over the group was a guy whose name then was Kathy Meidel. She now goes as Kathy Demu, which is her original name. And Kathy is a really, really dynamic person who just makes things happen. So the two of us put SoFree on the map, and it, at one point was the fastest growing atheist or secular humanist group in Canada, and it's still pretty solid. So that's where I really got involved, and then from there, Humanist Canada, and then 2011, broke away from Humanist Canada and formed Secular Connections Séculière. Now, we changed the name a few weeks ago. And that's basically, we're 100% lobby group. We don't have any charitable status. We just focus on lobbying for humanist rights in Canada. And of course, you talked about the Bangladeshi things, foreign relations too. So.
Well, and as we talked before, you kind of said that part of your aim was to be sort of a Canadian Freedom from Religion Foundation as well.
Yeah, that's yeah, that is part of it. I mean, we can't be a complete copy because our laws are different and circumstances are different. But yeah, I did. I've spent a bit of time with Dan Barker, and he's given me gave me a lot of suggestions about how they started Freedom from Religion and some of the things they ran into. And the key thing is that, you know, in both of our governments, you have a right to go to committee meetings. You have a right to go and speak to them, and so you just got to do that. So that's kind of the model we've taken. Two things that differ. One, our constitution differs. The other is that Dan apparently has about now 30,000 subscribers or something, and the money that goes with that. So Canadian atheists are not as pressured to do anything as Americans are, because we don't have people in our face all the time.
It's not in our face. And I've always said, you know, they say atheists are like herding cats, and organizing Canadian atheists are like trying to herd cats on catnip.
Yeah. I think that's probably it. They just
don't herd catnip. He's just gonna go have a nap in a sunbeam somewhere. So
yeah, and really, it's not just unique to atheists. A lot of minority groups in Canada have the same problem. We have this patina of human rights tribunals and Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which we're still very excited about because it's relatively new, and we think it protects us, and yet underneath, Canadian culture can be very, very discriminating. And just ask the descendants of those Japanese Canadians who were incarcerated during the war, or talk to Aboriginal people. So there's this sense of, oh, Canada's this great country with freedom of speech and all that stuff, but underneath that, you know.
Well, even the FLQ crisis was pre Charter of Rights, but still, you know, and that was the original Pierre Trudeau, the original Trudeau. He just, there were some, Trudeau the first. There was basically a terrorist group operating out of Quebec who wanted to separate. They kidnapped some politicians, one of whom was a British citizen, and it was just like, boom, martial law.
Yeah.
And that was, you know, it was just one day you have rights, the next day you don't. And that was it. And people tend to forget. I mean, I was very, very little when that happened, but I still remember that shit. Like, we what?
Well, the thing was that even without that, until 1982, basically the police in Canada could just arrest you and hold you for 48 hours without so much as asking your name. So, I mean, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was a big step forward. But, yeah.
Well, and along that too, just even recently, there have been issues in Toronto. I think it was in Toronto, where they had the right to just stop and frisk people for the hell, you know, and
carding, which has just recently been outlawed in Ontario. And
yet we have this. We're almost worse than the Americans in some respects. It's like, oh, well, they wouldn't do it unless it was for a good reason. So I guess we just go with it. And we really got to stop doing that.
Well, we're probably the only nation in the world that uses its national police force as a national symbol. Like, how many other nations do you know that here's our national police force, which used to have our Secret Service involved in it, and they're the people who are going to be checking out your background if you're doing any kind of security check and so on and so forth. And they're one of our national symbols. So we think they're just great guys. Well, not always.
Not always.
So,
most of the time, yes, but
yeah.
you know, there's always issues, and with some of the was it the G7 summits, we've had issues with overbearing police, and you know, the Vancouver riots, there was some talk of that as well. And you know, we don't get uppity too much, but you know, when we do, it's almost as if the police are so freaked out they just like completely go overboard.
Well, there've been, I mean, even back in the 60s with the Yorkville scene, the police decided, because Yorkville, again, back filling in a little history here, it's a little street in Toronto that's about a block off Bloor Street and is about a block and a half or 2 blocks long. But it was kind of the center of the little coffee houses and the you know, the places where the musicians came to play. You know, Leonard Cohen would go in there and you could go and sit and drink a glass of wine underage and whatever. It was kind of the hippie scene. And the Toronto police decided that the way to clear this out was to cause a riot. So they basically blocked both ends of it off, and they were the cause of the problem. And that was their way. So it was a technique they used even then. Now there was a big investigation about that, and people got fired, and et cetera, but it was. You know?
Holy.
Yeah. So,
what kind of challenges have you seen with secular so far, or have you seen?
Well, it is getting a big challenge is getting people's attention, and again, similar thread, the Canadians just aren't aware of the problems that are there. And so quite often you'll say something and they say, oh, really? I didn't know that. Well, it's because it hasn't affected them personally, but it's all embedded. And so the challenge for us is getting the attention of the government and making clear that, you know, there is a community here that you're discriminating against. I met with the Liberal caucus, I guess, 2012, and basically was talking to them about the problem of discrimination against atheists in the workplace and how there were laws. And they were absolutely astounded because they just never heard about it. It didn't even occur to them that our national anthem is, you know, completely discriminatory against women and atheists. And
actually, that's a good thing to bring up, because you actually kind of opened my eyes about that too. And in our friend Chris Sala's group, the Atheists in Light Ontario Network, we have a Facebook group, and you'd posted in there. And I mean, I've known the national anthem as long as I can remember, and you know, we learned it in French and all of that, but you never pay attention to what it is you're saying, because whenever we ever sing it, it was at school or some sporting event. You never think about it, but you posted, you know, up in there what the actual lyrics were. When you look at it, it's like, holy shit.
Yeah. Yeah, and the history is really amazing because of course, it was originally written in French. The French version is actually an old French-Canadian poem that was set to music by Cleix de Lavallee. But the English version it's not a translation. The first English version did not have any reference to all our sons command at all, which is one of the sexist line. That was put in as a recruiting thing prior to World War I. It was in all of thine command originally. And then Pierre Elliott Trudeau the first, he was the one that put the line in about God keep our land glorious and free in 1980. So it's crazy.
I mean, I remember when it happened, but I don't remember. I didn't realize that he was. See, I wouldn't have thought of that of him.
Well, he was a devout Roman Catholic. People don't know that, but he really was, and fair enough. But he let it drift in on that case.
That might be why he didn't freak when Margaret took off. Okay.
There you go. the irony for me is that when I was in university, and boy, this really dates me, they used to play God Save the Queen at the beginning of movies.
Right.
And we were in London, which was a very conservative town, London, Ontario.
Still is kind of.
Yeah. And as university students, we refused to stand up for God Save the Queen because we felt, oh, Canada was, even then, was the de facto Canadian national anthem, had been since 1939. And so, of course, the people in London were kind of, and this is the 1960s, so you're talking about 20 years after World War II or thereabout. And they basically would say, well, why aren't you standing up? This is for the Queen, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd say, well, no, but that's not our national anthem. Our national anthem. And it turned out that they joined us. So we ended up with, and then there were letters to the editor and all this stuff. So finally they changed it, and they actually played "O Canada" at the beginning of movies. So here I am, X number of years later, realizing that the thing has changed and we don't want people singing those words. So it's not, and people get wired up when they say, oh, well, that's the national anthem. That you can't change that. It's part of Canada's history. Well, no, it isn't. It's chanson de jour, you know.
You make the national anthem whatever the hell you want it to be, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
it shocked me that the French lyrics were really religious compared to, I mean, the English ones were bad enough. The French ones was like, what? And again, like, you know, you learned it in grade school, the French, but you never really paid attention to what it was saying.
No, that's right. And right now, even now, I talk to French teachers who have their children singing that, and I said, you realize what's in that, and it's really Roman Catholic is what it is, and you just, oh my, and yet it's not supposed to be. Religion's not supposed to be in public schools, but.
To clarify, though, because a lot of our audience is American, and they may not realize that we do not have anything like the separation clause at all.
That's right. That's right. We have nothing. The only thing that we have now is an interpretation by the Supreme Court of the second section of the Charter of Rights, which is you have the freedom of choice, freedom of conscience and religion. And then the second line on that is that you have freedom of personal philosophy. The Supreme Court has ruled that means that you also have the right to freedom from religion as much as freedom of religion. That's the only thing we have that separates church and state in Canada.
Yeah. And a lot of people may be surprised to know that in Ontario, we actually have what we call the separate school board, which is Catholic schools that are publicly funded.
That's right.
Me crazy, let me tell you.
Yeah, and while you're getting your blood starting to just come to a low simmer on that, you do realize that the Catholic school boards actually get a slightly larger grant per student than the public school boards do.
Yep.
That's because they claim they have more transportation to do or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's sort of like, well, if a kid should be going to X public school, but they want to go Catholic, they might have to get bused further or whatever. But they basically get away with it by, you know, when you do your tax assessment, you have a quote choice. Do I want my money to go to the public school board or the separate school board? And then they're saying, well, then people just choose to do that. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make it right, in my estimation.
Well, and the Roman Catholics claim that it's embedded in the Constitution, in the original, what I call the BNA Act of 1867. It's now called the Constitution Act. But Section 93 does protect that. But what it does is grandfathers this in Ontario, a thing called the Scott Act, which was passed in the 1840s, so pre-Confederation. And basically, it just says that if you have one of those things, then the Scott Act gave funding for separate schools up to the end of grade 8. Then if you have that, then you can carry on with that after Confederation. The other thing that is different from the American Constitution is that our Constitution is so much made out of court precedents and so on. I mean, we have things that are not really written in our Constitution, but that are constitutional, that were, 17th century or something in England, and that set up a precedent, and there it is. So Tiny Township, which is a Roman Catholic dominated, was then Roman Catholic dominated township up to the east of Nottawasaga Bay there, so semi-northern Ontario, lobbied the provincial government for funding up to the end of grade 10, and eventually took the provincial government to court and won. And so now that brought funding up to the end of grade 10 for separate schools. And then one of our premiers decided to do his Roman Catholic best friend bishop a favor and moved it up to, so now we're funded to all of high school, right up to the end of high school. And there's really, it'll be a really ugly constitutional case, but mostly it's a matter of votes. We're the last province that has a separate system in place. So.
And it's funny because they call it the separate school board, but it's just Catholic. I'd be like, okay, well, you want it separate, then we have to have, the Muslim school and the Wiccan school, the Zoroastrian school, and
well, that's actually what the United Nations said we're supposed to do, because the Canadian Jewish Congress took the case to the United Nations, and because they weren't getting funding for their Hebrew school. And so the United Nations says, yeah, you're discriminating. You can't fund one religion without all the others.
Exactly.
So, yeah, it's
obviously that didn't happen.
Well, it comes down to vote count, really. The population of Ontario, I think it's about 3% Jewish, and I'm not sure what the Roman Catholic percentage is, but it's probably
More than 3%.
Yeah. So
I think we're still the most populous province, are we not?
Oh yeah, by a long shot. Yeah.
It's like number 2. But yeah, everybody, and I always laugh because everybody sort of crams ourselves down into the pointy bit too.
Mm-hmm. We're all huddled up against the American border for warmth. That's what it is.
Yep.
Speaking of that, I was not too long ago, I was watching a weather forecast, and I just happened to be flopping from an American channel to a Canadian channel, and the Canadians were blaming the Americans for a blast of cold air coming from the United States, and almost simultaneously the Americans are blaming Canadians for a blast of cold air. So
you see a lot of that.
And with due respect to our American friends, a lot of the time you see the weather maps down there and there's just this blank area at the top. Like,
yes.
Nothing there. So where's this Canada you're talking about?
Some of my friends like to say Canada is America's hat, and I'm like, no, we're on top. You're our bitch.
Yeah.
That's what I always say.
And they really don't have any idea how the size of the place physically. It's
well, no, like I always laugh when I'm down south somewhere and they're like, oh, you're from Canada, do you know so and so? And I'm like, okay, we maybe only have 1/10 of your population, but we got a whole hell of a lot more space to spread out in.
Well, I love to point at a Canadian map and show them Vancouver Island. Say, see that little tiny island off the coast? Yeah, that's bigger than the British Isles. That's good for about 5 minutes of silence. Oh
yep.
Yeah.
I mean, like PEI is kind of small, but that's even if you go a long ways, that's a bit of a jaunt.
Yeah, I mean, it is the size of the country is.
Well, and I mean, like we did a trip down in the southern U.S. this spring, and we, in the space of 10 days, and this was just like on a motorcycle, sort of taking our time. We were through, we were to New York, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Maryland, like all in, And like there were days where we crossed like 3 states and we weren't even trying to make huge headway.
Oh, I know. This, well, I have an American cousin who lives actually on the St. Lawrence River. She lives just outside of Ogdensburg in New York State. And at one point in her working career, she worked about 25 miles south of that. We had a cottage, or there was a kind of family gathering space. It was about, half an hour north of Kingston, Ontario. And she said sometimes there's a long weekend comes up and they'll say, what are you doing for a long weekend? And I'll say, oh, I'm going up to Canada to visit the family cottage. And they'll say, you're going all the way to Canada for a long weekend? Like apparently there's this space warp between our two countries. So we are, and Canadians, by the way, can go on for hours like this. The Americans.
Oh, yes. Yes, we can. My friends know that.
Yeah.
Sure.
So
you were just,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just waiting for you to say something important because I wasn't going to.
Well, I was going to say you were just at what was it? The World Religion Conference.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, the local, I say local Ahmadiyya Muslims, given the population of Ontario, most of the Ahmadiyya Muslims in Canada live in southwestern Ontario, and they've got their big national headquarters in Vaughan, which is just north of Toronto. But anyway, they have this, they've had for 35 years now, or this was the 35th one, this World Religions Conference, and they invite spokespeople from the major religions. So Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Judaism, Aboriginal cultures, Buddhism, and here's the outlier, humanists. And it's for years now, the Society of Ontario Free Thinkers that I mentioned before has been a partner with these people in putting on this conference. And their reasoning is you can't really understand religion unless you understand what not religion is. So they have a soupçon of rationality there. So we've been there, and yesterday I was there explaining to them how we prevent radicalization among young secular humanists. And each of them are going to get up and explain how they managed it in their respective religions. So that was, and it's a bit, the thing is a bit too overweighted with ceremony and whatever, so there isn't as much time for discussion as I'd like. But at any rate, you get to, as I said to somebody, we get a chance to talk to a room full of people who are skeptical about skepticism. So it's a worthwhile adventure for us. Generally speaking, we're well treated. The questions can be a little bit gnarly, but that's okay. And
Probably
so
same crap what we're used to from religionists. Imagine.
Yeah, a lot of it. I mean, the bottom line is these people really have never looked outside their church brochures. So for them, an atheist is some kind of either real oddball or evil person.
Yeah.
They're very patronizing in some ways. But on the other hand, it is an opportunity to speak to them. We get a free table there. We can promote literature. We get to talk to people. They used to have it at the University of Waterloo, and when that was the case, we got more applications for membership for Soul Free out of that table than any other place, because the university students are all looking for a place to hang their hat as relative non-believers. Subsequent to that, we moved over to Guelph to this magnificent place called the River Run Center, which is a great facility, but it's fewer university students go because it's not actually on campus. But so that's really what it's all about. And yesterday I really explained to them that what we try to teach our children is the concept of looking at all these statements on the internet or social media that claims that, for example, that the Americans or Northwesterners oppress Muslims in the Middle East and they need to go and blow things up because that's how you set that right, these radical statements. And that we try to teach our young people, just look at that statement as an hypothesis and then ask the person for evidence and go through the process of inductive logic. And I don't think any of them ever really thought about that before, because they all use deductive logic. But so that's really basically what I did. And then got a question from somebody who claimed that humanists were the same as communists. How does that work when we are absolutely dedicated to individual rights and communists? Collectivists. So it really, that's the kind of stuff you get into. And
did you have some other favorite, I guess, questions?
Well, a lady accused me of being sexist because I didn't agree with her. No, I didn't agree with you because you haven't presented me any evidence for what you're saying. And one of the things you haven't presented me any evidence on is the fact that I'm being sexist. It's like, she was just sometimes you just run into them and it's just, you think, how can you figure out how to drive a car? Or
I guarantee you, I would disagree with you if you were male or female based on what you've told me.
Yeah, that's right. And it was, the other part was that one of the questions we were asking, all the speakers were asked the same question, and it was what's the role of religion in your faith? Because it was an all-male panel this year, so needless to say, some women objected to that. And I was able to say, look, our problem is that for whatever reason, demographically, about 70% of our membership is male and about 30% female. There's some sociological hypotheses about that, but I don't know how valid they are. Our problem is to even that up somehow. But in terms of our leadership or our organizers, it's pretty much 50-50. I mean, secular connection secular is actually 50-50. We get 2 males and 2 females on the board. Unfortunately, you won't see the ladies' names on the website because, as luck would have it, they're in provinces where they would lose their job if people found out they're atheists. So that's yeah.
What kind of job do you have in this day and age in Canada where you would lose it for? Are they like in the church? Well,
it's not so much the job as it is the province. And we live in Ontario, which is so big and pretty cosmopolitan. But once you get outside of Ontario and British Columbia, there's some serious issues around discrimination against atheists and people who have lost their jobs because people discovered that.
This is good to know because I've never lived outside of Ontario, so I don't see those sorts of things.
Yeah, it's sad, really, but true. And it's again, it's that under the table or under the radar kind of discrimination that goes on in Canada, where you just very quietly lose your job for some vaguely defined reason, and the reality is that you're an atheist.
Because I've worked in areas where I've done hiring and firing, and I just completed a human resources program, so I'm aware of, and especially like in Ontario, our laws are pretty strict when it comes to any of that stuff. But having been, working where we did hiring and such, oftentimes you would not hire someone or fire someone for reasons that you would never in a million years state or even allude to.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for instance, it's highly illegal to not hire someone who is pregnant because they're pregnant. But in Ontario, a woman who gives birth is entitled to a whole year of maternal leave, which is absolutely, great for expectant mothers, and I fully support that. But from a business standpoint, when you look at that, you're like, I'm going to hire this person who's visibly pregnant. So that's, several months in, I'm going to spend a month or two training them. I might get a month out of them before they leave for an entire year, and I'm legally obligated to provide them with some kind of job when they come back. So
Yeah.
while it is absolutely fair and right for expectant mothers to have that security, from the business standpoint, it becomes a real pain, because it's like, well, you know, why would I want to invest in someone that's just going to cause me to have to fork out a ton of money over the next year and a half? So I totally get both sides. And there were times where, you know, we're kind of like, that one looks like, I don't know. And if there was anything in their other abilities or experience that we could kind of point to, then we wouldn't hire them.
Yeah.
And
Well, and the other thing is that 3 months probationary period where you basically let go without any real reason at all. That's
but if somebody's visibly pregnant, we actually would be really leery of doing that.
Yeah.
Even though it's a probationary period, and we could say, well, they just weren't up to par. That person can come back and say, I'm obviously pregnant. That's why they fired me.
Yeah, but an atheist doesn't have that comeback unless there's a clearly logged incident where they found out you're atheist and they made some remark about it that you could record. Then, you know, there you go. The problem is that it's not a visible minority kind of thing. So it is an issue. And then again, it happens more outside of Ontario than in, because in Ontario, generally speaking, we don't even ask that kind of thing.
You're absolutely not allowed to ask that.
That's right. And so theoretically, that's true in other provinces, but I think part of it is too, it's a smaller community. So people know there are fewer sizable cities in the other provinces. But anyway, that's their cut on it. So we can't put their names on the website because they feel they would lose their job. Anyway, but the interesting thing is to go back to the question of women's roles.
Yes.
Religious speaker after religious speaker said we respect women because they are the mother of our children and they nurture people and so on and so forth. And of course, they weren't respecting women as people, or respecting people as, I don't know, broodmares. It just was.
Yeah,
that was their, you know. And the other one was the Christian representative, happened to be a retired United Church minister, said, oh, he was really glad when his church hired a second minister, an assistant minister, and it was a woman, because she could handle problems that he could never talk to women about. Oh. Okay. Apparently her theological qualifications were not important.
Who cares? It's, you know, you have a vagina and you menstruate, so obviously you have special qualifications.
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting, because I grew up in the United Church and we had female ministers forever that I can remember. They're probably one of the most liberal, if not the liberal denominations out there, wouldn't you say?
Oh, I think so. And I think their first ordained female minister was in 1935 or something.
Exactly. Like, I mean,
that's a new church too, but yeah.
Yeah, and they were, I think, the first to fully embrace having gay clergy. And I'm sure they're probably right in there with marriage equality and all of that. But, you know, to have, it's funny because even when you view them as so progressive, you know, amongst not really progressives, they can still sort of go, oh no, we're still sexist.
Well, I have to tell you that the United Church that I was in, they came to the point where they needed to replace the carpets in the church.
Right.
And they had to decide on the color of the carpets. And this split the congregation right down the middle. You had people who wanted blue carpets and people who wanted wine carpets and their red carpets. And they were, I mean, this is, again, a village of 500 people. how do you do business without speaking to the other half of the congregation? I thought, how can that be? Like the color of the carpet. We ended up getting beige finally, but it was, I mean, it was just, oh, come on.
Wow. And it's amazing, like, because you always hear a lot of people talk about, oh, I miss the community and that connection of church kind of thing. And I think of things like that and sort of the squabbles I remember as a kid. And I'm thinking, it wasn't all it was cracked up to be that I remember.
No. Well, the funny thing about that little village was, and this is again, the three main churches were the United Church, the Anglican Church, and the Roman Catholic Church.
Right.
Then there was a tiny little Presbyterian church. I have no idea how these people even paid their taxes. It was such a tiny congregation. And a Church of the Latter-day Saints. Well, the United Church, and I don't remember which of these is which, they can be interchanged, but the United Church had the tables, the Roman Catholic Church had the chairs, and the Anglicans had the dishes. So every time you went to a church supper, which was pretty regular because they all had to keep the, paying for heat and light, you ate off the same dishes and sat on the same chairs, but it was in a different basement. And it didn't matter that the Presbyterians didn't own it. They got to use this stuff, and so did the Church of Latter-day Saints. And I remember thinking, there's no way that there are enough Presbyterian ovens in town to cook all these turkeys. So I'm sure these were cooked in Anglican ovens. And they did that all the time. And yet they still have these separate churches. And it was, okay. It was a kind of strange situation, but yeah, you're right. And yet in many ways, people who join So Free or other humanist organizations are looking for that community.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of our tasks, is to provide that.
It's funny because that's not something I ever missed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, I got out of church when I was almost 18. So
Mm-hmm.
By that point now, I had joined a Calvinist sect by then. Yay me. And there was a lot more churchy things going on then. But, I still never really looked to church as a social thing.
Uh-huh.
That was just the thing that you did so you don't go to hell, basically.
Well,
I never understood that whole, like, people who look for some Sunday assembly or they go to Unitarian Universalists or something like that. I just like, why would you want to waste your Sunday with that stuff? But
mm-hmm.
that's
and I mean, the thing is, if you have a circle of friends and whatever, then you don't need it. I mean, it is. There are people, however, that, and even in So Free, that we have, where they just need somebody, somebody they can call. So there is that aspect to it. But yes, atheists tend to be a little more independent than people who join churches. This, by the way, is one of the sociological hypotheses about why more women don't become members of secular humanist groups and become atheists, and that is that their theory is that women want the stability of a community. So even if they don't believe in God anymore, they stay in the church because that's stability and community, and to change is too disruptive. Interesting idea. I'm not sure where they're getting their statistics on that, but
if that's the case, I'm definitely the outlier, because I just never, I was an atheist for 17 years before I even bothered to even see if there were other atheists out there. It never crossed my mind, because where we are, no one really cares one way or another. It was just never a thing, okay, I could be obnoxious with my family sometimes if they started getting churchy or something, but it never occurred to me that I should look for an atheist group. I'm just like, why, I don't know. I'm glad that I have.
At least in Ontario, the subject of religion doesn't come up really, until you're nearly married to the person. And then, you know, I mean, so you don't have people, you know, you're not being asked about it very much. So you can, yeah, you can go on for years and have nobody ask you. It's because part of it is, I think we just stay away from it because it, you know, first of all, we're too busy talking about the weather, but, you know, and after that, we're making fun of the Toronto Maple Leafs. But it is, then it's, so after that, you just don't. So yeah, you can go on, and I did too. I was for years. I was a teacher. I was. I mean, my wife knew I was an agnostic or atheist, but and I don't know how many other people knew until recently, just before I retired. But it just never came up. You know, so yeah. I can see why that would happen, and then that's probably why we don't have the big membership with in atheist groups in Canada, because again, people don't feel threatened. Particularly, we don't have that sort of sense of, you know, if you're not in a church, you're bad or whatever. It's not in your face all the time.
Exactly.
And that's the impression I get in the United States, and I could be wrong, but I get the impression that if you're an atheist in the United States, you may quite often be confronted with this.
Absolutely. I didn't see a whole lot in my travels simply because, well, the first time I went down this year was for the Reason Con in Hickory, North Carolina, but I was surrounded by, you know, 200 other atheists. So,
yeah.
You know, you're not going to see much of anything. Although driving around Savannah with Ashley and Bobby, you know, there's churches everywhere. They took me on my first trip down, drove me by the house that they used to live in a couple of years ago, and not really so much to show me the house, but to show me count how many churches there were within, I think, a block and a half radius. And I think we lost count at like 8.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it was ridiculous. And, you know, we're driving along and Bobby's like, oh, that's the snake handlers over there. And, you know, that's this one over here. And I was like, wow. And even when we stopped, was it in Virginia? Somewhere we stopped on our motorcycle trip, and we just were looking for parking on the street, and it was just like a storefront, and it was like blah 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 church all over the window on the storefront. I had to like stop and take a picture. Like, you can't even like stop on the main street without a church in your face. And it was over there were vans on the road. Like, I took a photo. We were just driving somewhere on the highway in Georgia, and there's this like van, you know, blah blah church all over it, and it really is pretty obnoxious. A lot.
All the religious colleges down there, and we tend to go to our condominium in March break, and that's when all the religious colleges tennis teams come in to use the facilities at our condominium compound to practice and do their, you know, and there they are. And it's this Pentecostal university and that whatever college. I mean, in this area, we have, you know, Rockaway Mennonite School, and we have, of course, you mentioned the separate school system. But it doesn't seem to be as pervasive, you know, as
point. Like, I went to the University of Waterloo, and I was talking to some of my American friends not too long ago about this, but on the university campus, there's this cluster of affiliated church colleges. And that's actually where my alma mater was Renison College. And that's the Anglican Church College. And we had St. Jerome's, that was the Catholic Church College. Conrad Grebel, that was the Mennonite Church College. There was the United one there, which name escapes me at the moment, but there was like this whole cluster of them. And yes, they were, quote, a religious college, but this was when I was a brand spanking new atheist, and it
Uh-huh.
never came up, ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
College had a chaplain on site, but
Mm-hmm.
you knew who he was, but it was kind of like, oh, he's there if you want a chaplain to talk to, kind of thing. And I think that he did hold church services in one of the main lounges on Sundays. I don't know because I never went. It was just, yes, it was a church college, but nobody really cared.
That's right.
It made me laugh though, because St. Jerome, because all of these colleges more so, they held classes there, but their sort of primary purpose was as an auxiliary residence, and that's why I lived there.
Mm-hmm.
I came fresh off the farm. I'd never seen so many people in one location in my life,
Oh,
and
I know
so
that's, yeah.
living in a smaller residence felt better to me than going to the main university residence where there was 1,000 kids there. We had that was like 2/3 of my entire freaking town in one building.
Yeah.
So that was more comfortable to me, but it never was ever a thing, except for the Catholic college next door to us. They were the only fully segregated residence on the university. Like in our, like we had segregated floors, so it'd be like, well, this is a women, but we also had co-ed floors. So they tended to be the senior students, but we did have 2 co-ed floors. Plus we had the segregated, but the Catholics, they had a rule that there was to be no members of the opposite sex on your floor after a certain time of day. And I think it was like 9 o'clock or something stupid like that. So I always laugh because if we were ever walking to the bar or going to the store late or going to night class, you would always see some car all fogged up and rocking in the Catholic parking lot. Like,
Yeah, there was always that problem. I went my first 2 years of university, I was at Westminster College, which was a United Church residence.
Okay.
And which was interesting because by that time I was pretty much an atheist. But again, there was no religious stuff. There was actually a chapel there, but it was just a residence. Then I moved over to Huron College, which is the Anglican college at Western, but it's also the seminary for Anglican priests, which was a good thing because I got, and then there was a really good religious knowledge course there, which I found very beneficial because I learned a lot simply. But yeah, it's the same thing. I would sit in the lounge with these guys who were going to be Anglican priests, and we'd kibitz, and by that time they realized I was an atheist, so it was all, we'd joke back and forth. And one of them said, "Well, what do you associate with Christians at all?" And I said, "I have some," and the old catch, the cliche lines, that came out of the racial problems in the States. Some of my best friends are Christian, but I don't think I'd ever let my daughter marry one. And they thought that was hilarious. So there just wasn't the issue there. But
exactly.
And they didn't. I mean, we had there was no such thing as saying grace at dinner or anything else like that.
Exactly. I mean, like I remember, like I lived at Renison for 3 years with various people. There's only one person that I could tell you, sorry, 2, that I could tell you what religion they were for sure, and that was one of my roommates was raised Catholic, and her family were still fairly religious. And then there was the girl that lived across the hall from me, she was actually originally from Bangladesh, and her family, they were Muslim, but she didn't wear the hijab or anything like that. You'd never know she was a Muslim, except that she refused to eat pork. And the only reason that ever came up was that she also wouldn't eat Oreo cookies. And I always remember that thinking, what? you're not going to eat an Oreo because of some god? Like, what?
Deprivation is that? I mean, under pork, okay, but Oreo cookies?
Bacon and Oreos, okay? Like pork chops and ham and all that crap. Yeah, whatever. But Oreo?
Whatever. Yeah. Well, I know when at Huron, if you could get up for breakfast Sunday morning, it was worthwhile doing because there were very few people who did that. You actually got fresh eggs and whatever. And a friend of mine now, and he was a bit of a shit disturber, unlike me. And he basically, we're going through the line and got the eggs, and the girl behind the counter said, "Would you like some bacon?" And this guy said, jokingly, "Only if is it kosher bacon?" She said, "I don't know. I'll go find out." So she went and got the boss, the manager, and he came out and assured us that, "Oh yes, it's kosher bacon." Okay, then I'll have some. Well, it was so shocking that I don't think we even laughed. He's like, how could that be that they would have to be that clueless that they would do? It's kind of sad, really, because you think, okay, come on, that's pretty obvious. But it was, that's the kind of stuff that would go on, and you think, okay. And then, of course, the Anglican priest guys who come in, we'd tell them that, and they'd be thoroughly upset with us. That was mean. You shouldn't have done that.
Now that I think about it, the one year there was a Mormon girl that lived on our floor, and that came up. I guess she talked to a few people about being Mormon and whatnot. And I remember she actually did a presentation for us, like just our little group of girls who lived together. In one of the Dawn was like the head of the floor. She was sort of like the senior girl, whatever. And I remember getting together in a group and her talking about being a Mormon, and it didn't. I mean, I wish now I had actually paid attention, because studying Mormonism has become like one of my pet hobbies.
Yes. Okay.
I kind of wish I'd paid attention now, but I was, but like I say, I was fresh, brand new atheist at that point, and I was still like, fuck religion, And I remember being annoyed that I had to sit there and listen to this crap, but it was kind of like, we're here to be supportive of our floor mate kind of thing. And yeah, whatever. Okay, I'll listen to stupid talk for however long. But the only other thing I mainly remember about her was that she had celiac, and she's like the first person I ever met that was like, oh no, I can't have wheat. And I was like, what? Because you may not know, but I'm like super, super picky, and I like live off of pasta and bread and stuff. So I'm like, what? No wheat? How could you live? So it is so funny.
I'm Canadian, isn't? Can't you be deported?
Well, I don't know, man. If anybody's going to be deported, it's probably going to be me, because I hate winter. I don't like hockey. I don't like beer, and I don't like Tim Hortons coffee. So I'm expecting a deportation notice like anytime.
I'm not a great hockey fan, nor am I a great fan of Tim Hortons coffee. So I guess I'm sort of next on the list.
I don't like hockey, or I don't like coffee at all, and I don't like hockey at all. I roomed with a girl from Timmins who was like obsessed with hockey, so she used to drag me to the varsity games because she had a crush on the goalie.
How did he know what he looked like? I mean, she fell in love with the mask. I mean,
she'd seen him at a party, and he was hot apparently. I don't know, but
okay, there you go. Yeah.
Well, why don't we take a little break? And I apologize. I've been kind of busy and stuff the last couple of weeks. I haven't made up a new segment of anything yet, but I thought I'd bring up an oldie and a goodie in honor of our new Mr. Trudeau II. One I did a few months ago on the ad hominem a logical fallacy, because it features the good old PM before he was the PM. So I'll go ahead and we'll play that. It's about 10 minutes. If you need a bio break or anything, now's a good time to do that. And then we'll come back and chat a little bit more.
Okay.
And now it's time for logical fallacies for dummies. On this week's logical fallacy for dummies, I'm going to talk about the ad hominem fallacy.
Pardon my French, but you're an asshole.
One of the most prevalent, if not the prevalent, logical fallacy found on the internet and in debates and political speeches worldwide. The logical fallacy of ad hominem occurs when the person speaking is being attacked other than the ideas they may be presenting. It happens everywhere, and the internet is one of the favorite places for people to use ad hominem because they appear to be anonymous, they can hide behind a pseudonym, and they don't have to face the person they're insulting right in front of them. So they tend to be more harsh and say things they may not otherwise say. Where the fallacy comes in is the ideas being presented really don't have anything to do with the person presenting them. So by insulting the person, you're really not discrediting what their ideas are by any stretch. You're only trying to make them look bad and hope that people will just assume that if they're a bad person, their ideas must be bad too. But that just doesn't follow. You need to discredit the idea on its own merit and not just because you don't like or don't think anyone else should like the person speaking. The clips that I have will illustrate this. The insults being levied are nothing to do with the ideas being presented. It's purely there to try and make the person presenting the ideas look bad. Take a listen.
College co-ed Susan Fluke, who goes before a congressional committee and essentially says that she must be paid to have sex. What does that make her? It makes her a slut, right? Makes her a prostitute. She wants to be paid to have sex. She's having so much sex she can't afford the contraception. She wants you and me and the taxpayers to pay her to have sex. What does that make us? We're the pimps.
Boiling point today in question period. Environment Minister Peter Kent chided the NDP's Megan Leslie for missing an international environment conference.
If she had been in Durban, would have seen.
Trouble is, the government had blocked opposition MPs from attending as part of the Canadian delegation. It was too much for one Liberal MP.
I called him a piece of excrement. It was in such poor faith that he did that. I lost my cool.
This is right-wing Christian radio host Rick Wiles. Let's listen.
I don't know what it will take for the U.S. military and intelligence community leadership to wake up and realize that an Islamic jihadist is in the White House. As American citizens, we no longer have protection from the Muslims because they have infiltrated Washington and put one of themselves in the White House. Why do you think Jihad Berry did not attend the massive march of people in Paris along with all the other world leaders? It's because he is for the jihadists. He's not against them. Barack Obama is a Muslim jihadist.
I hate you. You don't think God is real because you're gay and stupid. Why don't you stop being gay and stupid and go have sexy time? I bet you have sex with monkeys because evolution says so, Mr. Gay and Stupid. Ah, bitch. No, you are not an atheist. You are a gay theist. Lol, lol. They should call you Richard Dickens because you're so busy sucking off Bill Maher and those Labour Party dipshits. You can't do anything else. Oh, and your science books are shit. Not as shit as God delusion. Dude, it was so poorly written, it was a waste of toilet paper, motherfucker.
So first up, we have our friend Rush Limbaugh going on about Sandra Fluke. He can't even get her name right. Ugh. So she's the lawyer that testified before Congress about the need for contraception to be covered in health insurance. What Limbaugh is doing here is twisting her argument around. He's saying that she must be having so much sex that she's a slut and can't afford to actually pay for birth control, which of course is utter bullshit. He's just trying to discredit her valid arguments about why contraception should have been covered under health insurance. Nice one, Rush. Next is a great one from Canadian politics from 2011. Our now leader of the opposition, Justin Trudeau, got into a bit of a kerfluffle there, and he went and called the other member of parliament a piece of shit. He didn't come out and say, hey, that other member couldn't go because the government forbade her to go, and you should know that. No, he just lost his cool and screamed that he was a piece of shit across the House of Commons. Real good there, Justin. Then we have a fellow by the name of Rick Wiles, who's saying that Barack Obama is a Muslim jihadist. Yeah, that's real believable. I had to actually listen to it a couple of times before I realized that Jihad Berry was Wiles's nickname for Obama. Really, yeah, highly ineffective. And last but not least, we have some of the quote love letters that were sent to Richard Dawkins, and he's reading them aloud. The person that he's reading doesn't have anything to say about why Dawkins might be wrong, other than to call him names and say that, you know, he likes to fuck monkeys and whatever. Even if Dawkins did actually fuck monkeys, that wouldn't make his information about evolution wrong. It wouldn't make his science wrong. Because having sex with animals doesn't necessarily mean that your facts are incorrect. It just means that you need to go on more dates with people. Oh, and I do want to point out that I, of course, do not think that being gay is a bad thing, but, you know, it's Christian logic, so they don't really understand these things. If they managed to do their homework, they would know that Dawkins is a well-known LGBT ally, so calling him gay probably doesn't even insult him. In fact, judging by the way they were laughing, I think we can be pretty confident in saying that he wasn't insulted in the least. Either way, nothing here that was said does anything to discredit the ideas. The biology is still sound, whether you think Dawkins likes to have sex with monkeys or not. It's irrelevant. So those using ad hominem are seeking to do two things. They're seeking to distract the target of their abuse from the argument, spending time defending their character, spending time refuting the stupid things that are being said about them, and then maybe they'll lose traction in the actual debate going on or the discussion. And of course, as I said earlier, the second thing they're trying to do is make that person look bad. So hopefully anyone who's watching or listening to the discussion will just dismiss those comments out of hand and decide that that person doesn't know what they're talking about. Of course, if they did their homework or actually read something, they would know that those things don't even matter. A person can be a horrible person and still be right in a discussion or argument. It absolutely happens all the time. Even people that you don't like can be right. That's just the way it goes. So that's why using an ad hominem is just silly. It might feel good for a few seconds, but it's not going to get you any further in an argument. Thanks for listening, and that was this week's Illogical Fallacy for Dummies. Oh, I'm going to have to update that one because it says Trudeau is the leader of the opposition, which of course he's not anymore.
I don't think he ever was he?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
For a brief time, I think. Well, he was leader. Weren't the Liberals were the opposition until now, were they not?
No. It was NDP. But there you go.
Damn. Oh, well. Nobody bothered to correct me on that. So
there you go. I'm just picky. But you notice I didn't go ad hominem on you. I just
you did. Right. All right. But I
really have to wonder what, and we talked about Americans looking at Canadians, I really have to wonder what Americans are thinking about this Prime Minister-elect, which he is until Wednesday. You know, and here he is with the tattoo on his arm. The man's a serious amateur boxer, among other things. But it's just, this is not the usual Prime Minister that
but Trudeau's do that. I mean,
yeah.
you know, the first ideation was very against the grain as well. So it's sort of
yeah.
the way. It's funny when after the election, though, I posted something along the lines, well, so far now I've seen 2 shrubs, which is what I like to call the bushes. I've seen 2 shrubs, and now we're into the second Trudeau. Are we going to make it the second Clinton for a trifecta here? Like, holy
Yeah.
deja vu, people.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very unusual in Canadian politics. We've never had a
We never.
some combination.
Never.
You know.
And like for me, it's so weird because every time I hear blah 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 Prime Minister Trudeau, I'm like, what? Am I back in the 70s now?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, it's a. Oh well, we'll get used to him, I guess. And he's got a very ambitious agenda to look after. So
yes, I'll be honest, I didn't vote Liberal, but you know, I think there's a lot about him I like. There's some things I don't like, and that's why I didn't vote in that direction. But I'm cautiously optimistic, I guess I'll say.
yeah. Well, again, he's got a pretty good pool of talent to put in his cabinet. And
so is this whole thing about Elizabeth May gonna pan out, do you think? Because I think that would be an excellent thing to do.
I think it would be too. Certainly, I was pleased to see that he invited her to the environmental conference. I mean, how could you have a Canadian delegation without Elizabeth May there? And now I see he's opened it up, obviously, to Mulcair, who said he's going, and then whoever the Conservative interim leader is probably going too.
And for those who don't know, we're talking about Elizabeth May is the Green Party member of Parliament who she actually has a seat in the House of Commons, and the Prime Minister, there's rumblings that he will actually ask her to become Minister of the Environment, although that traditionally would mean she would have to switch parties. That's sort of up for discussion, which, you know, I mean, why? I get kind of why they sort of want that, but in this case, it doesn't make sense to me to make her switch parties.
Well, I think the other factor there is that Dion is there, and he's been the Minister of Environment. He's a Liberal, so I can see. And the other thing, perhaps we need to talk about, is that the Parliament, when it's operating normally, which it hasn't for the last 10 years. When it operates normally, there are committees that any legislation or any policies actually go through to these committees. And a person like Elizabeth May, who's really highly respected in the House of Commons as a member of Parliament, she's been elected the Member of Parliament of the Year a couple of times, can have a lot of effect on those committees. And so it may not be necessary to make her a cabinet minister. I think it would be nice icing on the cake, but maybe not. I don't. You know, technically speaking, I don't think it's necessary.
No, I don't know either. It's born out of this tradition that the caucus it always presents a united front, and I guess the thought is that, well, if you don't belong to the same party, how could you always have a united front? And, you know, that does make some sense. But on the other hand, I think she's a reasonable enough person that, you know, I don't think that's a huge issue.
Probably not. Again, you're right. It's this party tradition that we've kind of evolved into, where the party is very important, and So flexibility in terms of, there's no legal reason why he couldn't put her in his cabinet.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether she's changed parties or not. The Canadian Prime Minister can put,
Whatever the hell.
well, they have to be other MPs or senators, I guess, but other than that, there's no real restraint on
Senate. What do you think he's going to do at the Senate?
He's kind of stuck with it a bit. It occurs to me that when you look at the original, again, we're going back to the Constitution Act of 1867. There's no mention in those clauses, clause 21 through 36, I think. There's no mention whatsoever of the Canadian Prime Minister appointing senators. It's the Governor General who appoints senators. So you say, all right, and so from 1867 to 1931, when it changed, it probably worked. We probably had a house of sober second thought, and that was fine. 1931, the Statute of Westminster said the monarch will now govern with the advice and consent of its ministers. From that point on, the Governor General had to listen to the Prime Minister.
Yep.
My question for the constitutional lawyers, because I'm not a constitutional lawyer, is aren't the premiers of the provinces ministers of the Crown too? Could not Trudeau wanted to do it, go to them and say, okay, you, Ontario, have 24 senators. You keep those 24 positions filled through the lieutenant governor if necessary, and so on. It would decentralize Confederation quite a bit because you'd have a House of the Province and you'd have a House of sober second thought because you really just want a group with a different perspective.
Exactly.
I think it might work very well. But the caveat is that it would decentralize Confederation quite a bit.
Well, I mean, it can't be any worse than, Harper going, what? I didn't tell them what to vote. I just told them what to vote.
Yeah, exactly. And Mike Duffy's the best senator we've ever had because he raises all that money for the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
That was his whole function. And Pamela Wallington, I mean, these guys are supposed to be governing the country, and Duffy can't figure out that he lives in the wrong province, so he can't represent that Prince Edward Island. He lives in Ontario. And Wallen can't figure out how to separate her expenses when she flies from Ottawa to Toronto for a paid board of directors meeting, and then on to Saskatchewan where she's supposed to be representing as a senator. I mean,
and it's, I've never had an issue with members of parliament or senators or whatnot needing a good sized travel or expense account because, the whole cliche is that politicians don't do anything, which is bullshit. They work really damn hard a lot of the time. Now there are the ones, whoever that idiot was that lived in Mexico for years and years.
Yeah.
That guy obviously wasn't working so hard. But I mean, for the most part, politicians really do work hard, and they do oftentimes have a demanding schedule and have to be in several provinces throughout a week and whatnot. And I honestly usually don't have any problem with them needing hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that kind of thing because, it's hard work. But when they're just, total disregard for whatever it is they're doing or why, or not even bothering to try and justify it, then it gets to be a little.
Well, the one that got me with Duffy was submitting election expenses. That's excuse me, you're a senator. You don't run for election. How can you submit election expenses?
So for our American friends, our senators are appointed. They're not elected. And they're also senators basically for life or until they decide they want to retire. They don't want to retire, then they can't really, nobody really says you need to step down or whatnot. So although the guy who was living in Mexico, I think was the first one that ever had been fired, I think.
Yeah, they finally expelled him.
And that
But
was
it's the senators who decide who's going to be expelled and who isn't. So it's an inside club. It's really, you know.
I think they realized at that point that he really wasn't giving them a good. No. Yeah, because I mean the guy.
Originally, senators were appointed for life, and there are several examples of them literally dying in the House of the Senate. Which, you know, is the senator from so-and-so not going to vote today? Excuse me. Oh, pardon me, but you're dead. I mean, I think the retirement age now is 75, but it's a conundrum for us because changing the Canadian Constitution is really difficult. Again, for the benefit of our American friends, until 1982, we didn't even have a formula to do it. We shipped it off to the Brits to do it for us. Yeah. But then we came in with this formula that said 7 provinces with a majority of the Canadian population can change the Constitution. But the Supreme Court has ruled that since the Senate is indeed representative of the House of the provinces, and it's defined in that infamous Constitution Act, that we have to have unanimous consent. So in order to change the Constitution around the Senate at all, you have to get 100% of the provinces to pass the legislation.
And I think sometimes I wonder if that's why Harper was so chicken shit to even sit down and talk to the premiers, because he was like, what if they actually agree? Oh, I'm fucked.
Yeah, you're done. Well, and the issue, though, is that in terms of the Senate, the minute you open it up, Quebec's going to want Quebec. There's an issue around Quebec. And what they'll do is there are all kinds of other problems that provinces have with the Constitution. So it would be a mess. So nobody wants to do it.
Yeah. I just laughed, though, at the one debate where somebody asked Harper, don't you think it would be a good idea to sit down and talk to your premiers about Senate reform? And he just said no.
No. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I found the debates incredibly frustrating because none of them know how to debate.
That's right. Yeah.
I sat there for 2 hours going, that's a logical fallacy. That's a logical fallacy. What the? Yeah.
Yeah, they're not. The one moment I thought where Trudeau really made grounds, and it was that first English language debate when Mulcair was challenging him about the possibility of a sovereignty referendum, and does 50% plus one do it, or does it need to be 60% or whatever? And Mulcair kept saying to Trudeau, give me a number, tell me what you think this number is. Trudeau finally said, my number is 9, the number of Supreme Court judges who said it's 50 plus 1, in case you weren't paying attention. And it was like, oh, good, whack. But that was
a good one.
Yeah. So I think he gained a lot of ground on that one.
Because, I mean, Harper was just kind of like, I don't need to debate because I'm the freaking PM and meh.
And we're just above all that. Yeah, again, for American listeners, the Liberal Party was very much in third place when we went into this long election. And the NDP,
long by our standards, I have to say. And yes, I'm rubbing it in, people, because I'm sick of your damn election, and you've got a year to go.
Yeah. Well, at least you have entertainment value in yours, the Donald Trumps and so on. But so this guy Trudeau, who's the youngest of the bunch and started out in third place in the polls, and Mulcair, who is the NDP leader, who was in the leader of the opposition and had, some really heavy-duty debating skills in the House of Commons and et cetera, et cetera. And Trudeau came from third place to first place and got a majority government in that 7 days.
Although that quip that Mulcair had about Trudeau knowing a lot about smoking, I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, you know all about puffing. Yeah. Oh, there were some good those kinds of things. But you're right, the debates are, for one thing, it's very difficult to have a debate with 5 people there or 4 people there.
Yes, but I mean, it just got to the point where no one was saying anything like debate wise. Like even Trudeau at one point, he just kept repeating the same thing over and over. I'm like, okay, I got it the first 4 times you said it. You know, Mulcahy, you don't like him, whatever. Like, ugh.
Well, so much depends on the moderator too. I watched or started to watch the French language debate, and the moderator had no control whatsoever. She just completely, they just went after you. Well, of course, they're speaking French and talking over each other, and the translators haven't got a hope of doing anything for you when that happens. So I just said, okay, I might even watch the hockey game now.
I watched the McLean's debate and the Globe. Was it Global TV that did one, or no? Who was the other? The Globe. The Globe.
Yeah.
The Globe debate and the McLean's debate. And after that, when the third English language one was coming along, I was like, no, I've had it. You guys don't know what the hell you're doing.
Here's the sad part, that probably the most capable leader in terms of debating and holding people's feet to the fire is Elizabeth May.
Yep.
And they won't let her in the debate. Harper didn't want her in there because she just takes the man apart every time she speaks.
The first one, I was like, now that woman knows how to debate. Like, what the hell's
exactly she does, and she knows her stuff.
He never came back again because Harper's dead.
Yeah, but she did. She used Twitter and commented on the debate all the way through, and I think gained a lot of credibility with that. But
that's good. Oh,
anyhow.
It goes.
So our task now with SCS is to start making connections with whomever is in that Trudeau cabinet.
Is there anything you wanted to discuss before we start wrapping it up for this evening? So what is Secular Connection Seculier up to these days?
Well, we're kind of on a bit of a pause now. We did a submission on October 19th, the panel discussing the Supreme Court decision on assisted dying. We made a submission to them on the 19th, and we keep referring to SCS, or Secular Connection Seculier. I'll get my Anglophone tongue around that. The website for that, if I can give this plug, is www.secularconnection, and it's CONNEXION.ca. And that the new version of National Anthem that we talked about earlier in the program is there in both French and English. And the our submission to the panel on assisted dying is there. We're in the midst of a big national debate there. And by the way, in Canada, laws like that are federal. In the state, I know it's state by state, but laws like marriage laws and assisted dying laws are federal. So once we just have to get through that one government, and we're done.
Our non-existent abortion law would have been federal too, but we don't need one of those.
Oh, it's just gone away, and we don't talk about gay marriage anymore. We just call it marriage. I mean,
exactly.
So SCS is doing that. Of course, we're going to continue to hold their feet to the fire about the blasphemy law and that sort of thing. And of course,
we talked about that quite in depth. We had David Rand on a few shows ago about that in depth.
Yeah, and that's interesting. There are a number of different secular groups or humanist groups in Canada, and that's one that we're all sort of on the same wavelength with, the Humanist Canada and CSI and Les Penseurs Libres in Quebec and SCS are all basically, that one's a common one. And so that's certainly on the plate. We are looking at the business of discrimination in the Income Tax Act as well. We're starting to look at that, and I don't know whether you noticed on your income tax form or not, but there's a place there where clergy can deduct their cost of their residence. And our humanist deficients can't. So,
well, that's not cool.
no,
That's
and
not cool
if
because
a group like Snowfree wants to have a building fund, we have to ask permission on a per building basis. Religions automatically can have a building fund. So this,
okay, that's not cool.
no.
Definitely not cool. Yeah, and there's a lot of debate too about the whole, tax the churches thing, and I'm actually a little bit on the fence simply because my good friend Dave Foda made a point a while ago that if churches are still tax exempt, they're still legally prevented from being political in the pulpit. And yes, they do it all the time anyway, but at least if they're still tax exempt, there's a way of recourse there. And as soon as they start paying taxes, then they have no restriction. And I've heard people argue, well, really, they do it so often that there may as well be no restriction now anyway. And so I'm still a little on the fence with that.
Yeah, their charitable status in general does that. I mean, SOFRI has the same restriction, but yeah, they can argue that actually saying something in the pulpit, yeah, it gives them an extra layer of argument, I guess.
Yeah.
It all becomes, and I was talking actually with the local mayor at a meeting with the mayor of Waterloo a year or two ago, and I can't not remember how that subject came up, but she was asking me whether we were going to raise this issue as something we needed to discuss in council, and she really didn't want to because it's a hot potato. And I said, basically my thinking was the only way it'll come up is if we decide we want to have a building, then we will apply for exemption of taxes. And by the way, did you know that the Church of Scientology in Cambridge is not tax exempt? They have to pay property taxes. And the rationale in Cambridge was that since they don't perform marriages, they have to. Okay.
Well, there we go.
Who knew?
Humanist Canada does, so there we go. Yeah, those guys, I don't know if you saw, they were circulating a fax to Cambridge businesses trying to stop the new bill for the reformation of the Mental Health Act.
Oh, yeah?
Because of course they're against anything to do with psychology and whatnot, because it's all the thetans. You just got to get your bad thetans out. But they were actually sending faxes to businesses, and one of our local guys got a copy of one, and it was saying that this bill would take away your right to like you could just be committed, without any recourse kind of thing. Yeah, which of course is bullshit. Because
right up there with all those teachers that are going to demonstrate masturbation in the classroom now with that new sex curriculum.
Yes.
Let's see those 6 people who are going around all the schools objecting to that. Like, excuse me, where does it actually say that in the curriculum?
That almost made me wish I had children, because they would not want to come up against me on that stuff, let me tell you, because it's just, and I actually, they had a rally downtown here in the summer, and we took our tandem bicycle down, and by the time we got there, the bulk of it had wrapped up, but we signed the petition and everything. And and I make it no secret that I'm a survivor of abuse. And I have said, I damn well wish somebody had told me, about good touch and bad touch back then, because that sure as hell would have clued me into some things a little earlier. And to think that, I mean, come on, who in their right mind in a public venue is going to say, yeah, we're going to teach, first graders how to masturbate? Like, are you fucking stupid? Like, come on. That's just scare tactics and absolutely nothing else.
Well, that's exactly what it is. And it's that hyperbolic false information, false news that they use, and churches use it all the time. I mean, why do all those UBC students who were surveyed a few years ago think that atheists are less trustworthy than rapists? Well, it's because their churches have been telling them that atheists are evil for years. And
and that if you don't have God, then you can't stop, raping and killing people and everything else. And I always like to quote Penn Jillette on that. Yes, I've absolutely raped and killed everyone I've ever wanted to do, which was 0. And if your number's not 0, then you're fucking sick and go surrender yourself right now, kind of thing.
Well, it is one of the techniques they use, and unfortunately their followers don't read anything outside the church brochure, and it's so mindless. And again, that's one of the reasons that So Free is pushing to get secular humanism into the world religions curriculum in schools, and why Krista Carlo's pushing the critical thinking courses.
Which was the and it was funny because he was saying that some of the pushback he's getting is actually from other educators who are kind of like, well, I do that already, so I don't need you, kind of thing. It's like, you know what? There's so much disinformation out there, the more the merrier,
Oh yeah, well the thing is that I know as an English teacher, senior university prep English teacher, we taught basic structure of argument. We talked about most of the major fallacies, but nothing in terms of the depth that Krista Carlo's course goes into. And I know I had students who wanted more of that, but you have to cover the English curriculum. So,
I even made the point. I mean, I graduated the University of Waterloo, and I had no idea what a logical fallacy was until I started debating religious nuts on the internet. Like, how sad is that? I'm like, what? What's a logical fallacy, huh? And I've written papers, and it's just ridiculous that I didn't know that.
Well, I mean, I went through high school without ever having learned what a research essay was. So you can imagine what my first research essays were like in university. I had to teach myself how to do it. But again, I don't remember ever thinking about logical fallacies until certainly after university. But I mean, you were, in my case, because I was doing history and English, everything was very structured anyway. So this is click, 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 click. And
even in high school, our history, one of our history teachers ran debates in our class, and I still never learned what a logical fallacy was. And I was, if we were a big enough school to have had a debate club, I would have joined the debate club. We just go down, Hicktown High School. We didn't even have a football team, so
that was. Yeah, same thing. And we had 125 students in our school, so you can imagine how tiny.
We blew you out of the water. We had like 400.
Oh wow, big time! Yeah, we had a basketball, both boys and girls basketball teams. Those were our major sports, and then after that, it was pretty much nothing. Well, track and field. I mean, every school can have track and field because you don't need anything to do track and field.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. I was like, we used to have pep rallies for basketball. I really don't like basketball, but anything else you wanted to cover before we wrap it up for this evening?
No, except that SCS is in fact trying to be Freedom from Religion Foundation North, and obviously, if you go to our website, which I mentioned before, commercial plug this time. If you we could help. We could use your help with donations. Again, the funding it costs money to lobby the government, even though we do most of it by email and internet. It's still, we have to pay for a website. We have to do that stuff. So if you can find your way to there and throw a couple of bucks in the pot, we'd really appreciate it.
Well, we'll put up the website in our show notes as well, so that'll be available.
Yeah, and at least go read it. That's where we post most of what we're doing, and we are there, so we keep that.
some good articles up there. And you have a blog yourself, do you not?
I do, called, what's it called? Canadian Humanist, I think. Isn't that terrible? I can't remember the name of my own blog. It's dougthomaselmira.wordpress.com. Anyway,
Excellent.
is the URL for it. Yeah, and yeah, I try to keep up on issues. I think this week I'll be publishing the abstract for my speech at the World Religions Conference. So.
Oh, excellent. I'll have to go check that out.
Mostly because I'm lazy and it's easy to do that. I'm also struggling to write my second novel, so that I'm running out of mind space for this stuff. So.
You have to get like an external hard drive for that.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the day when I can plug my smartphone directly into my head, and that'll help me remember stuff. And
yeah, like turning the clock back and that sort of stuff. I'm infinitely glad that my computer and everything does that for me. Although we have a couple of manual digital clocks in the house, and at least twice today I looked at a certain clock. I went, oh wait, that one hasn't been changed yet. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Well, my wife has some digital watches, and I have to go get onto the computer to get to the manual to figure out what buttons to push to change the damn things back. That's another thing, we need to get rid of that stupid daylight saving time. Is what a crock.
When I was a kid, I always loved it because my mother never remembered, and we always missed church that weekend.
There you go.
We'd show up and be like, we missed it, darn.
Oh, geez. Well, yeah, that's yep. At any rate, that's not very high on the secular connection agenda, I must say. But there's the right to complete your life with dignity is certainly there. We tried to be an ally with dying with dignity, and so on. So.
It's absolutely a travesty that someone would have to go to a foreign country to control, the time and dignity of their own death.
And the thing is that when you go there, as I have, and you go through that experience with a friend, you realize how much of a normal part of Swiss society it is, and that it's not. They just accept it as a normal part of life that you get to make that decision.
North America is so screwed up about that. They really, really are. Like, I wish, yesterday was Dias de los Muertos in Mexico and many parts of South and Central America. I just think that's the most fabulous thing. Like, I so wish, and actually that is the anniversary of my father's death too. And I just, that would have been amazing to hey, let's go to the cemetery and have a party. Like, hello.
Yeah.
Why are we not all doing this?
Yeah. I think you're right. It's a great idea. But it's just, we have this, somehow we want to set that apart as not a part of life. It's something else.
Yeah. And, it's this whole idea, if we don't acknowledge it or talk about it or think about it, then maybe it won't happen. And that's just it's kind of if we don't talk about anything bad, it won't happen. Yeah, I get that's what happens when you believe in sky fairies and you start thinking about that shit too.
Well, that whole afterlife thing, okay. It's
I didn't tell you. You knew I worked as a poll clerk for the election.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Yes. This is actually my first show since the election, so I haven't told this story. But the deputy returning officer that I was paired with, and for those of you in America, basically the two of us sit at a table and in concert doing different things. We verify, is this the right person? Are they able to vote? Here's your ballot, that kind of thing. But if we're not both there, no one votes, which is a whole other thing. So I was stuck with this lady for 15 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And, because we're there all damn day and we can't leave. So I had bags with, various drinks and snacks. And, I brought a book and my tablet and we were lucky enough to be in a school, so we had free Wi-Fi and all of that. So I had a whole bunch of shit with me. Well, one of my bags, it's like a canvas rucksack kind of thing. And I've got various buttons on them. And one of them is God with the circle and the line through it. You know? Not, only like quarter size, right? Well, and I'm like, I'm here, I'm working. This is an important public service. You know, it's not the time and place for that kind of shit, whatever. Well, she spied this button and she starts talking and she's like, oh, you know, what did she say? We were talking about crafts because she's probably about 10 years older than me. And we were talking about crafty things. And I'm like, that's pretty safe conversational thing. And, you know, she says, well, I had 2 craft rooms, but I'm consolidating them into one because God told me that I needed to open up my second room for a person in need, you know? And I'm like, well, you know, that's really good that you would want to, you know, have a room for a person who needs somewhere to stay, whatever. And she's like, yeah, I noticed you don't believe in that sort of thing. And I'm like, oh no. And then, but she says, but we can agree to disagree on that. I'm like, yes, we can. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that lasted about 10 minutes. And then went, you know, I have some questions. I'm like, here it goes. Come on. What is it? You know, and well, how can you account for the wonder and beauty of nature? And, you know, I forget half of it. It was the whole cliche crap.
Stuff we've heard forever.
And the whole, well, how do you find a purpose to life? And I'm like, life is more precious because I only have one, you know, and you don't believe in an afterlife. And then, of course, my favorite, were you ever angry at God? Just, oh.
No, I get pissed off at the Tooth Fairy one time now.
You know, I said that in a thread, and I joined, well, I didn't join, somebody added me to a group on Facebook ages ago, and I completely ignored it until recently, and something caught my eye, and then I started looking, and I swear all of the crazies of the religious nut job set are in that group, but that came up at one point, you know, atheists are just angry at God, blah, 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 and somebody asked me that again. I'm like, no, never been angry at God, but I did get pissed off at the Tooth Fairy that one time when I was 6, and I thought I should have got 50 cents and I only got a quarter. Like, bitch, you know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but my lovely friend there, she gave up after about 45 minutes because she didn't ask me anything I hadn't been asked like 5 million times before. So I was like, boom, answer, boom, answer, boom. So finally, she just kind of gave up and went back to maybe we will agree to disagree.
Yeah.
And the funny thing was at the end of the evening, there was another one of the poll clerks was she was kind of freaking out because her ride had to leave and they hadn't balanced the count yet, and she couldn't really leave, and she was getting all anxious, and she's like, I have anxiety issues, and I'm like, really? Never could have told that. But you know, she's like, well, how am I gonna get home? Well, Miss Religion there is like, someone will make sure you get home. And I'm thinking, it ain't gonna be you, is it?
No.
But you know, she's like, calm down, you know, finish your count, somebody will make sure you get home. And of course, comes down to it, we're packing up. I'm like, so who's taking Missy here home over there? Oh, well, I have to do blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, right. Where do you live? Right by me. I knew this was going to happen. Get in the car.
Yeah, that's the...
But yeah, she shut up eventually because I'm thinking, oh my God, like 15 hours of this. But I think when she figured out it wasn't my first rodeo, she gave up pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, that's once they figure out that they, you know, or you refer them to a couple of books and they realize, oh, geez, I'm going to have to read now. That's, you know, more than I thought.
I actually had John Hick's book with me. So I was like, yeah, this is really good.
Read that one, or I'd send them to the the greatest show on earth, and then they hear it's by Richard Dawkins, and they're completely turned off.
Well, yeah, as soon as you say Doc is like, ah, you know. Well, if I hadn't had John Hick's book with me, I probably would have had Krista Carlo's book with me. So I'd be like, you know, these are actually nice guys. I know them, like.
They're good guys. Nothing wrong with them. Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, well, that's just, we just have to carry on doing that. I don't know.
Exactly. Well, at the very least, because she did seem to enjoy chatting with me for the rest of the day. It's not like, she started crossing herself every time she looked at me or anything.
Yeah, or stop talking altogether.
Yeah, no. Well, she's one of these very strong personality people, but so am I. So I think that's when she realized, oh, this one's not a follower. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe, just maybe, she might realize, wow, atheists aren't all like, fire-breathing Satan worshippers. So we can only hope.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've come to the end of the evening. So, Doug, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
This was fun. Yeah.
Lots of good stuff to talk about. Absolutely.
I had enough formal speech making for the week.
There you go. We are very informal here, let me tell you. We never know what shit's going to happen or what won't happen. This is the first time I haven't had either one of my ladies show up, but that's okay. I did hear from Beth, and I think she was a victim of the clock change and some new meds, and she actually didn't wake up in time. So that's okay.
Yeah.
As I say, she's recovering from a stroke. We'll be a little bit lenient there. That's okay. Yeah. So, and I'll have to check in with Miss Ashley, and hopefully they're still there. They were experiencing some pretty hefty storms there, but that's Savannah. They tend to do that. So, again, thank you so much. And once again, if you want to throw out your websites for folks.
It is www.secularconnection, and connections is spelled EXION.ca. So, yeah, it's the bilingual connection. That's what it is.
Yes. And of course, you'll see us here next week. You can also see me at Holy Crap, the Vlogcast on Sundays at 12:05 a.m. With the crap crew, as we've now been dubbed. We had Aaron Raw on this past week. That was really fun. No idea what Shujin has up his sleeve for this week, but it's always a surprise. And of course, Atheist Apocalypse. We will be dropping a new episode on that one soon. AtheistApocalypse.com. And in the production side, we are getting ready to wrap up season 1 and start producing for season 2 for you guys. So check us out. We got a lot of fun plot twists going to come your way soon, I think. So enjoy that. And we will be here next week as usual. Hopefully, I will have more than just myself to entertain you, but you never know. So until then, I am going to leave you guys, as always, with our friend David Foda's Humanist Creed.
I know the truth and power of reason and of rational thinking, and I will use them to my advantage. I know the truth and power of educating myself and of expanding my intellectual boundaries, and I will educate myself. I know the truth and power of vanquishing ignorance, and I will do so whenever the opportunity presents itself. I know the truth and power of morality without supervision, and of true and accurate righteousness. I know the truth and power of obliterating tyranny, be it intellectual, emotional, or philosophical, and will work toward that goal whenever and however possible. I know the truth and power of human ingenuity. I know the truth and power of human compassion, and I will be mindful of the welfare of others. I know the truth and power of equality and fairness for all living things. I know the truth and power of the importance of our families, our friends, and our fellow men and women. I know the truth and power of human stewardship of our lands, our waters, and our skies. and I will try to act to preserve our environment. I know the truth and power of the sciences of mathematics, of physics, and of chemistry, and of the important role of these disciplines in understanding the workings of this cosmos. I know the truth and power of the rejection of all notions or beliefs that reside in the supernatural or the superstitious, and know those notions or beliefs that we are not supposed to be able to explain. And I know that these rejections are necessary for humankind's survival. I am a human being with a free mind, liberated from irrational influence and from unreasonable dogma.